Your child talks back, not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to make you feel something shift inside your body. A tone, a pause, a look that feels dismissive. And before you can think, your nervous system reacts. Your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, your mind starts forming explanations. You feel the urge to respond immediately, to correct them, to explain why that tone is unacceptable, to make sure they understand. This moment feels small, but it is not. Because this is the exact moment when backtalk is either strengthened or dismantled. Most parents do not realize this, not because they are careless, but because no one explains what is actually happening in the brain during these interactions. So stay with me, because once you understand the mechanism behind backtalk, you stop fighting it, and you start shutting it down calmly, consistently, and permanently. This is not about being stricter. It is about being precise. Let us start with a simple truth. Children do not talk back because they want conflict. They talk back because conflict creates leverage. Leverage over attention, leverage over emotion, leverage over outcomes. And leverage is rewarding to a developing nervous system. Now think about a familiar scenario. You tell your child no. No screen time. No extra dessert. No going out tonight. A reasonable boundary. Your child reacts instantly. That's not fair. You always do this. Everyone else gets to. You feel pressure. They need to understand your reasoning. So you explain, you justify, you defend. From your perspective, you are teaching logic. From your child's brain, something very different is happening. Their emotional brain is in control. The amygdala is active. This part of the brain detects threat and mobilizes defense. When it is active, the thinking brain goes offline. Logic does not land. Reasoning does not register. Explanations become noise. And here is the critical insight. When you respond to backtalk with explanations, debates, or emotional engagement, you reward the behavior. Not intentionally, neurologically. Your child's brain learns a simple rule. Backtalk leads to engagement. Engagement feels powerful. Power feels regulating. So the brain repeats the strategy. This is why backtalk often increases after parents try harder to explain themselves. Now pause here. If this feels uncomfortable, that is normal. Most parents believe explaining is respectful. But respect is not built through debate. It is built through boundaries. And boundaries must be delivered in a form the nervous system can absorb. Now let us talk about attention. Attention is currency. Where you place it determines what grows. If emotional escalation gets attention, emotional escalation grows. If calm communication gets attention, calm communication grows. This is not moral. It is mechanical. Now consider what usually happens next. Your child pushes harder. You escalate. Your tone sharpens. You lecture. Your child argues back. Suddenly, you are no longer enforcing a boundary. You are negotiating authority. And once authority becomes negotiable, backtalk becomes a tool. This is not a discipline failure. It is a system failure. Now let us introduce the shift. There is a response that interrupts this entire pattern. It is not clever. It is not emotional. It is short. 3 seconds or less. And it works because it removes the reward. No debate, no explanation, no emotional energy. Just a calm boundary. Here is the response. Try again respectfully. That is it. 4 words, neutral tone, and then silence. This feels almost wrong to many parents. Too simple, too cold, too unfinished. But that discomfort is exactly why it works. Because silence removes leverage. There is nothing to argue with, nothing to push against, nothing to escalate. Now let us be clear. This is not ignoring your child. It is separating emotion from engagement. You are not saying their feelings do not matter. You are saying the way they are communicating does not work. That distinction teaches emotional intelligence. Feelings are allowed. Disrespect is not. Now imagine this in real time. Your child says, "That's stupid." You pause. 1 breath. And you say calmly, "Try again, respectfully." Then you stop talking. Your child looks at you. They wait. Nothing comes. They try again. "You're being unfair." You stay steady. "I'll listen when you're calm." And again, silence. At this point, one of 2 things happens. They escalate briefly, or they pause. If they escalate, let them. Do not chase. Do not lecture. If they pause and try again, you engage. "Thank you. What do you want to say?" The boundary never changes. The outcome never changes. But the path to communication becomes clear. Calm works. Backtalk does not. Now let us address the fear immediately. What if my child explodes? They might, briefly. Psychology calls this an extinction burst. When a behavior stops working, the brain tries harder before abandoning it. This is normal. It is a sign the pattern is breaking. If you stay consistent, the behavior fades. If you re-engage emotionally, the old pattern returns. Consistency is the price of leverage. Now let us talk about tone. Tone matters more than words. If "try again respectfully" is delivered with irritation, sarcasm, or threat, the nervous system hears danger. Danger triggers escalation. The words are correct. The delivery is not. This is why self-regulation is the real work. The response is simple. The execution requires discipline. Now consider the long-term lesson being taught. You are teaching your child that emotional escalation does not create access. Regulation does. This lesson generalizes to teachers, to peers, to future authority figures. You are not stopping backtalk. You are shaping how your child communicates under pressure. Now think about how rare this skill is. Most adults argue emotionally. They defend ego. They escalate conflict. Children who learn regulation early stand out. Quietly. They become trusted, respected, reliable. Now let us talk about power struggles. Power struggles only exist when both sides are emotionally engaged. When one side disengages emotionally while holding the boundary, the struggle collapses. This is why the 3-second response feels almost unfair. It ends the game. And games only work when both players participate. Now consider how this changes you. When you stop explaining, defending, and debating, parenting becomes quieter, less exhausting, clearer. You conserve emotional energy. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. Your nervous system settles. And calm parents create calmer children. Now let us address empathy. Some parents worry this response lacks empathy. Empathy does not require long explanations. Empathy is conveyed through tone, presence, and timing. Once your child is calm and respectful, empathy lands. I know that was frustrating. That sentence works because the nervous system is now receptive. Empathy delivered too early reinforces dysregulation. Empathy delivered after regulation builds trust. Timing is everything. Now pause. If this feels deceptively simple, that is because simple systems often have the most power. Complexity feels intelligent. Simplicity feels risky. But behavior changes through simple rules applied consistently. This is one of those rules. And it works because it respects how the brain actually functions, not how we wish it would. To understand why this approach works, you need to see backtalk not as a moral failure, but as a neurological pattern. Children do not wake up wanting to be disrespectful. They adapt. They adapt to what works. In every interaction, the brain is asking one question. What gives me influence? When a child talks back and a parent reacts with explanations, emotion, or intensity, the answer becomes clear. Backtalk creates leverage. Not logical leverage, emotional leverage, and emotional leverage is powerful. Now consider how this looks from the inside of a child's nervous system. They feel blocked. They hear a no. Their body reacts. Heart rate increases. Muscles tense. Emotion rises. This is not defiance. It is frustration. And frustration seeks release. When the parent engages emotionally, the child's nervous system discharges. They feel momentary relief. Relief is reinforcing, so the brain stores the pattern. Next time frustration appears, the same strategy activates. This is not conscious. It is learned behavior. Now let us talk about why explaining feels so natural to parents. Because adults regulate through language. We talk things out. We reason. We justify. But children do not regulate through language. They regulate through nervous system alignment. Tone before content. Energy before logic. This is why explanations fail in emotionally charged moments. They are aimed at the wrong system. Now think about authority again. Authority is not about being right. It is about being stable. When the parent explains too much, the child senses uncertainty. Excessive explanation often sounds like negotiation. And negotiation implies that the boundary is flexible. Children are experts at detecting flexibility. Not because they are manipulative, because they are learning. Now let us introduce a key idea. Backtalk thrives on movement. Words, tone, emotion. The 3-second response removes movement. It is still, neutral, predictable, and stillness has power. In psychology, this is called stimulus control. You change the stimulus, the response changes. Now let us talk about consistency. This method only works when the rule is stable. Every time backtalk appears, the same response appears. No improvisation, no mood-based variation. Children forgive mistakes. They do not forgive inconsistency. Inconsistency creates hope. Hope fuels testing. Testing fuels backtalk. Consistency closes the loop. Now let us address one of the most common mistakes parents make with this method. They use the words correctly, but they change the tone. Slight irritation, subtle sarcasm, hidden threat. The nervous system hears all of it, and once threat is detected, regulation collapses. This is why the parent's internal state matters more than the script. The words are easy. The regulation is the work. Now let us connect this to long-term respect. Respect does not come from fear. Fear produces avoidance. Avoidance collapses when fear disappears. Respect comes from predictability and dignity. When children know exactly what happens when they speak respectfully and when they do not, they adjust. Not because they are controlled, because they are learning. Now consider how this changes family dynamics. Arguments shorten. Emotional intensity drops. Parents stop repeating themselves. Children stop performing frustration for attention. The home becomes quieter. Not emotionally empty. Emotionally safer. Now let us talk about empathy again, because it is often misunderstood. Empathy is not rescuing a child from discomfort. Empathy is acknowledging emotion without rewarding dysregulation. This is why timing matters. When the child is escalated, the response is boundary. When the child is regulated, the response is connection. This sequence teaches emotional intelligence. Now let us bring in a long-term lens. Children raised with this structure develop a strong internal rule. My emotions matter, but they do not control others. This rule is rare, and it is powerful. It shapes friendships. It shapes conflict resolution. It shapes leadership. Now think about how many adults struggle because they never learned this rule. They escalate to feel heard. They argue to feel powerful. They confuse emotion with influence. Children who learn regulation early do not need these strategies. They communicate clearly. They wait. They choose words. Now let us talk about the parent's transformation. When you stop engaging emotionally, you regain energy. You stop rehearsing arguments. You stop feeling pulled into drama. You become less reactive. And less reactive parents are more effective. This is not about suppressing emotion. It is about managing it. Now let us address a subtle fear. What if my child feels ignored? They will not, because engagement returns the moment communication becomes respectful. You are not withdrawing connection, you are redirecting it. Connection is conditional on regulation, not obedience. This distinction builds trust. Now consider the role of silence again. Silence feels uncomfortable because it removes control. But silence communicates certainty. Certainty is calming, and calm systems learn faster. Now let us connect this to discipline. Discipline is not punishment, it is teaching. And teaching requires the brain to be receptive. The 3-second response creates receptivity by stabilizing the nervous system. Now imagine this pattern after weeks of consistency. Backtalk decreases. not disappears completely, but loses intensity, loses frequency, loses power. Your child still disagrees, but they do it differently. They say, "I don't like this," instead of, "This is stupid." That shift is everything, because it shows learning. Now let us zoom out. This is not a hack. It is systems thinking applied to parenting. You change inputs, you change outputs, and systems always outperform force. Now let us prepare for the final shift. Because technique without mindset collapses under stress. The final piece is not what you say. It is who you become in these moments. At some point, this stops being about backtalk. It becomes about who your child is becoming. Because the way a child learns to handle frustration, disagreement, and authority becomes the template they use everywhere else. This is where short-term parenting decisions quietly turn into long-term outcomes. Now let us connect this to leadership, because leadership is the clearest lens for understanding respect. In every environment that rewards performance over noise, the most influential people share the same trait. They regulate first. They do not rush to defend themselves. They do not argue to prove a point. They pause. They choose words carefully. They let silence do the work. This is not charisma. It is control. And control over self always precedes control over systems. Children who grow up watching this internalize a powerful rule. Emotion does not equal authority. Regulation does. Now think about how rare this is. Most adults never learned this. They escalate to be heard. They argue to feel powerful. They confuse emotional intensity with influence. Children who learn regulation early stand out later, quietly. They are trusted. They are listened to. They are given responsibility. Now let us talk about respect again, but from a different angle. Respect is not about agreement. It is about containment. The ability to hold emotion without letting it spill onto others. This skill is not innate. It is trained. And it is trained through repeated exposure to calm boundaries. Now imagine your child in a future disagreement, with a teacher, with a manager, with a partner. They feel misunderstood. They feel frustrated. What do they do next? Do they escalate? Or do they regulate and communicate clearly? They will default to the system they learned, not consciously, automatically. This is why early emotional patterns matter so much. They bypass logic. They live in the nervous system. Now consider self-respect. Children who are constantly argued with learn to argue. Children who are consistently regulated with learn to regulate. This shapes their internal dialogue. In a regulated environment, the internal voice sounds like, "I can pause. I can choose my words. I can wait." In a chaotic environment, the internal voice sounds like, "I have to push. I need to defend myself. If I don't escalate, I lose." These internal voices guide behavior for decades. Now let us talk about confidence. Confidence is not loud. It is quiet certainty. Children who grow up with predictable authority develop this certainty. They know where boundaries are. They know what works. They do not need to test endlessly. This reduces anxiety, and lower anxiety improves behavior. Now let us address something many parents miss. Backtalk often increases when children feel powerless, not because they want control, but because they lack agency. The 3-second response actually restores agency. It gives the child a clear choice. Speak respectfully and be heard, or continue escalated and be ignored. This is not punishment. It is clarity, and clarity empowers. Now let us connect this to long-term discipline. Discipline that relies on punishment teaches avoidance. Discipline that relies on structure teaches skill. The 3-second response is structure. It does not shame. It does not threaten. It simply redirects behavior toward a productive channel. Now let us talk about the parent's internal shift. When you stop debating, you stop chasing validation. You stop needing your child to understand you in the moment. You trust the system. This is difficult for thoughtful parents, especially those who value reasoning. But leadership requires tolerating misunderstanding temporarily. Understanding comes later. Now let us bring in a financial analogy, because this audience understands compounding. Short-term volatility is uncomfortable. Long-term stability is built by tolerating that discomfort. The 3-second response creates short-term discomfort. Silence feels awkward. Not explaining feels irresponsible. But the long-term return is emotional stability. Now let us talk about escalation again. If you ever wonder why arguments spiral so fast, here is the reason. Both nervous systems are active. Both are seeking release. Both are escalating. Someone has to disengage for the system to reset. The 3-second response does exactly that. It resets the system. Now let us talk about mistakes. You will mess this up. You will explain. You will argue. You will escalate. This does not destroy the pattern. Repair restores it. When you go back and say, "I shouldn't have argued, let's reset," you teach something even deeper. You teach accountability. And accountability is the foundation of respect. Now let us talk about dignity. Children who are corrected without humiliation retain dignity. Dignity reduces defensiveness. Defensiveness fuels backtalk. This is why calm boundaries work better than lectures. Now let us zoom out one last time. This method works because it aligns with how the brain learns, not through logic, through repetition, through reward structures, through nervous system cues. You are not changing behavior by force. You are changing the environment. And environments shape behavior. Now let us prepare to close this, because technique alone is not enough. The final shift is philosophical, and once it clicks, everything else becomes easier. At a certain point, the struggle ends, not because your child suddenly becomes perfect, but because the system changes. You stop reacting to behavior and start shaping conditions, and conditions are what create lasting change. Backtalk fades when it stops working. Not through force, through clarity. This is the quiet power of the 3-second response. It does not overpower the child. It outgrows the behavior. Now let us look at what is really happening when you pause instead of argue. You are teaching your child that emotional escalation does not create access. You are teaching that respect is not about fear. It is about self-control. You are showing that authority does not need to perform. It simply exists. This lesson stays long after the specific rule is forgotten. Now, consider what this means for you as a parent. When you stop explaining and defending, you reclaim mental space. You stop rehearsing arguments in your head. You stop feeling pulled into emotional negotiations. Your nervous system settles, and a settled nervous system leads better. This is not about being distant. It is about being anchored. Anchored parents create anchored children. Now, let us be honest about discomfort. Silence feels uncomfortable because it removes immediate relief. Explaining feels relieving. Arguing feels active. Pausing feels exposed. But relief is not the goal. Stability is. And stability always feels boring at first. This is why calm authority feels unnatural in a culture addicted to noise. But boring systems outperform dramatic ones. Every time. Now let us talk about consistency one last time. This method works because it is predictable. Not harsh, not clever. Predictable. Children adapt to predictable systems. They relax inside them. When children relax, behavior improves. Not because they are controlled, because they feel safe. Safety reduces the need for power. Now pause for a moment. If this video has changed how you think about Backtalk, authority, or discipline, subscribe to this channel. Not for algorithms, but because these conversations are rare, and they matter. And if there is one person in your life, a partner, a friend, a sibling, someone you genuinely care about and want to build a better relationship with their child, share this video with them. Not to criticize, not to correct, but to support. Because parenting, like leadership, is not meant to be done alone. Now let us bring this home. You do not need better arguments. You do not need longer explanations. You do not need louder authority. You need fewer words, more clarity, and the discipline to pause. The 3-second response works because it teaches a simple rule the brain understands. Disrespect goes nowhere. Calm communication opens doors. Once that rule is learned, behavior changes. Not overnight, but permanently. You are not raising a child who obeys. You are raising a human who knows how to regulate emotion under pressure, who knows how to speak with dignity, who knows how to handle disagreement without destroying connection. This is not about winning today. It is about building capacity for a lifetime. And it begins with something deceptively small. A pause, a breath, 4 words, and the strength to stop talking. That is not weakness. That is mastery. And mastery always looks simple from the outside, but it changes everything.